The winter of 1884 hit Park City, Utah with a vengeance that no one had seen in decades, and Emmett Logan found himself standing in the middle of his small ranch house, staring at four crying infants with nothing but a prayer and rapidly dwindling supplies when his sister's body had barely gone cold in the ground outside. He had buried Sarah 3 days ago, laid her next to her worthless husband who had abandoned them 6 months prior. And now, Emmett was alone with 4 babies who needed more than he knew how to give. The eldest was barely 18 months, a little boy named Thomas who kept calling for his mama in a voice that cracked Emmett's heart. Then there were the twins, Margaret and Matthew, just 9 months old, and finally little Rose, only 4 months and still nursing. Sarah had been sick for weeks, her body weakened from birthing 4 children in such quick succession, and the harsh winter had taken what little strength she had left. Emmett was 26 years old, a cowboy who had spent the last 8 years working cattle ranches across Wyoming and Utah, a man who knew how to break a horse, rope a steer, and survive a stampede, but he did not know the first thing about caring for babies. He had ridden straight through a snowstorm to get back to Park City when news reached him that Sarah was failing, but he had arrived too late. She had died in the night, alone except for a neighbor woman who had found her the next morning. Now the neighbor women brought what they could spare, but most families were struggling through the winter themselves. Mrs. Henderson had shown him how to make a thin gruel for the older children, and explained that little Rose needed milk, real milk from a woman, or at least from a goat or cow. But Emmett's 2 cows had dried up in the cold, and he had no money to buy milk from town. The general store owner, Mr. Peterson, had extended him credit for flour and a few cans of beans, but Emmett knew that charity only stretched so far in hard times. The ranch house was small, just 2 rooms with a fireplace that Emmett kept burning day and night, feeding it with wood he chopped in the frozen pre-dawn hours while the babies slept. The wind howled through gaps in the walls that he stuffed with rags and old newspapers, and snow piled up against the windows until the whole world seemed buried in white. Thomas had developed a cough that rattled in his small chest, and Rose cried endlessly, her tiny face red and scrunched with hunger that Emmett could not satisfy. He tried everything the neighbor women suggested. He soaked bread in warm water and tried to feed it to Rose with a spoon, but she was too young and only screamed louder. He made thin milk from flour and water, but it ran right through her and left her weaker than before. Margaret and Matthew survived on the gruel, though they were losing weight, their little faces growing gaunt. Thomas refused to eat most days, sitting in the corner and crying for his mother until he exhausted himself into sleep. Emmett had not slept more than an hour at a time in days. He walked the floor with crying babies, changed soiled cloths that he washed in melted snow and hung by the fire to dry, and watched helplessly as his supplies dwindled. He had $12 to his name, money he had saved from his last cattle drive, but the snow was too deep to get to town, and even if he could make it, $12 would not last the winter. On the 7th day after Sarah's death, Emmett stood at the window watching the snow fall and wondered if he should try to ride to town anyway, risk his life in the blizzard to find help, when he saw a figure moving through the white landscape. At first he thought he was hallucinating from exhaustion, but the figure grew closer, resolving into a woman bundled in a heavy coat, a scarf wrapped around her face, carrying something in her arms. Emmett opened the door before she could knock, and a blast of cold air and snow swept into the house, making the babies wail louder. The woman stepped inside quickly, and he shut the door behind her, his hands shaking from cold and exhaustion and something like hope. She unwrapped the scarf from her face, and Emmett saw that she was young, perhaps 23 or 24, with dark hair plastered to her head with melting snow and brown eyes that assessed the room in one swift glance. She held a large pot wrapped in towels, steam rising from it. "I am Victoria Foster," she said, her voice clear and strong despite the howling wind outside. "Mrs. Henderson sent word that you needed help. I brought soup." Emmett could only stare at her, his exhausted mind struggling to process that someone had walked through a blizzard to bring them food. Victoria did not wait for a response. She moved past him to the fireplace, set the pot on the hearth, and began unwrapping her coat. Underneath, she wore a simple brown dress and sturdy boots, practical clothes for a harsh winter. "How long since that baby has eaten?" she asked, nodding toward Rose, who was crying in a wooden crate padded with blankets that served as a cradle. "I cannot get her to take anything," Emmett said, his voice rough from disuse and despair. "She needs milk, real milk, and I have none." Victoria crossed to the crate and picked up Rose with the confidence of someone who had held many babies. She examined the infant quickly, her face grave. "She is too thin. How old is she?" "4 months." "And your wife?" "My sister," Emmett corrected. "She died last week." "Her husband left months ago. I am all they have." Victoria's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained brisk. "The soup I brought has bone, broth, and cream. We can try giving it to her with a cloth. Babies can suck milk from soaked fabric if they are hungry enough. The older children can eat the vegetables and meat." She moved with swift efficiency, directing Emmett to bring her clean cloths while she ladled soup into a bowl. The smell of chicken and herbs filled the small house, and Emmett realized he had not eaten a proper meal since the funeral. His stomach cramped with hunger, but he focused on following Victoria's instructions. She sat in the rocking chair Sarah had used for nursing, held Rose in one arm, and dipped a corner of clean cloth into the warm soup broth. She squeezed out most of the liquid and then touched the cloth to Rose's lips. The baby turned her head away, still crying, but Victoria persisted with patient determination. She kept offering the cloth, her voice low and soothing as she spoke to the infant. "Come now, little one. You need to eat. This will help. Just try a little taste." After what seemed like an eternity, Rose's lips closed around the cloth, and she sucked weakly. Victoria's face showed no triumph, only concentration as she continued the slow process of feeding the baby one cloth full at a time. Emmett watched in amazement, then remembered the other children and moved to feed them. Thomas allowed himself to be coaxed to the table, his eyes wary but his stomach overriding his grief. Emmett spooned soup into small bowls, blowing on it to cool it, and watched as the 3 older children ate with desperate hunger. Margaret and Matthew made a mess, soup dribbling down their chins, but they ate more than Emmett had seen them eat in days. "How did you know to come?" Emmett asked Victoria as he wiped Margaret's face with a damp cloth. "I work for Dr. Hammond in town," she said, still focused on Rose. "I am his nurse. Mrs. Henderson came to his office yesterday saying that you had 4 babies and no help, that the youngest was failing. I told the doctor I would come. You walked all this way in a blizzard." "I have a horse," Victoria said. "She is in your barn. I hope you do not mind that I settled her there before coming to the house. I brought oats for her in my saddlebag." Emmett felt a wave of shame that a woman had traveled miles through dangerous weather while he had been paralyzed by his own helplessness. "I should have done more. I should have found a way." "You are doing what you can," Victoria said without looking at him. "But one man cannot care for 4 babies alone, especially not through a winter like this. These children need constant attention, and you need sleep before you collapse." "I cannot pay you," Emmett said, the words bitter in his mouth. "I have $12 to last until spring, and I owe the general store for supplies." "I did not come for payment," Victoria said. "I came because children need help and I can provide it." Rose had finally fallen asleep in Victoria's arms, her tiny stomach fuller than it had been in days. Victoria stood carefully and placed the baby back in her crate, tucking the blankets around her. Then she turned to survey the rest of the house with a critical eye. "When did you last chop wood?" she asked. "This morning before dawn. You will need to do it again before dark. The temperature is dropping, and we cannot let the fire go out tonight. I will watch the children while you work. Then we need to discuss how to get more supplies." Emmett wanted to argue that he could not accept her help, that it was not proper for a single woman to stay in his house, that he should be able to manage on his own, but the words died in his throat. Pride would not keep the babies alive. He nodded and reached for his coat. Outside, the cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath and making his eyes water. He trudged through snow that came up to his knees to reach the woodpile behind the house and began swinging the axe. The physical labor felt good after days of helpless frustration. Each swing of the axe was a small victory against the winter trying to kill them all. He worked until his arms ached, and he had split enough wood to last 2 days, then carried armloads into the house and stacked them by the fireplace. Victoria had cleaned the soup bowls and was washing the children with warm water from a pot she had heated. Thomas stood docilely while she scrubbed his face and hands, and the twins sat wrapped in blankets, their hair damp and combed. "They needed proper washing," Victoria said when she saw Emmett looking. "Clean skin helps prevent illness. Do you have any chamomile or peppermint? Something for tea to soothe the oldest boy's cough." "I think Sarah had some herbs," Emmett said, crossing to a shelf where his sister had kept her few medicines. He found a small tin of dried chamomile and brought it to Victoria. She nodded approval and set water to boil. "We will make him tea with honey if you have it. The honey will coat his throat and help him sleep." They fell into a rhythm as the afternoon wore on, Victoria directing and Emmett following her instructions. She seemed to know exactly what needed to be done and in what order, and Emmett realized how lost he had been, trying to handle everything with no knowledge or experience. With Victoria there, the chaos resolved into manageable tasks. When evening came, she fed the children again, this time producing bread and butter from her saddlebags along with more soup. Emmett ate for the first time that day, the hot food restoring some of his strength. After the meal, Victoria gave Thomas his chamomile tea sweetened with precious honey, and the little boy drank it without complaint, his eyelids already drooping. "You need to sleep," Victoria told Emmett as she settled the children for the night. "Real sleep, not just an hour here and there." "I will watch them tonight." "I cannot ask you to do that. You did not ask. I am telling you, if you collapse from exhaustion, these children will have no one. You are no good to them if you cannot function. Now go to bed." Her tone brooked no argument, and Emmett was too tired to fight. He stumbled to the small bed in the second room, the bed where Sarah had died, and fell onto it fully clothed. He meant to rest for just a few hours, but his body had other ideas. He plunged into sleep like a man drowning, and the darkness took him completely. He woke to pale sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment he could not remember where he was or why he felt such deep dread. Then memory returned in a rush. He sat up quickly, his heart pounding, and stumbled into the main room. Victoria stood at the stove, cooking breakfast while Rose slept in the crate and the 3 older children played quietly on a blanket she had spread on the floor. She glanced at him over her shoulder. "Good morning. You slept 14 hours. The children are fine." Rose woke twice for feeding, and I got her to take more broth. Her color is better today. Emmett ran a hand through his hair, feeling disoriented. 14 hours. He had slept 14 hours while a woman he barely knew cared for his sister's children. I am sorry. I should have woken. You needed sleep. Come eat breakfast, then we need to talk about the future. They ate in silence, Emmett trying to organize his thoughts while Victoria fed the babies. When everyone had eaten, she sat across from him at the small table and folded her hands. You cannot do this alone, she said bluntly. These children need more care than one person can provide, especially an infant who should still be nursing. Rose needs milk several times a day, and I cannot walk out here through the snow every day to bring it. You need steady help. I know, Emmett said, the admission painful. But I have no family except for a brother in California, and I cannot pay someone to stay. I am not asking for payment, Victoria said. I am proposing a practical arrangement. I will move out here and help you care for the children through the winter. In exchange, you will provide me with shelter and food. Emmett stared at her. You would give up your position with the doctor to live in a drafty ranch house and care for children that are not yours. Doctor. Hammond has another nurse who can take over my duties. I am good at what I do, but I am not irreplaceable. These children, however, will die without proper care. That makes the choice simple. People will talk, Emmett said. A single woman living with a single man, it is not proper. People will talk regardless, Victoria said with a shrug. They will say you are a fool for taking in your sister's children, or they will say I am a ruined woman for helping you. I stopped caring what people say a long time ago. The question is whether you care more about propriety or about keeping these children alive. Put that way, there was no question at all. Emmett met her steady gaze and nodded. I would be grateful for your help, Miss Foster, more grateful than I can say. Then it is settled. I need to return to town to collect my things and inform Dr. Hammond. I will be back tomorrow with more supplies. In the meantime, I am leaving you enough soup for today, and I want you to keep Rose on the broth schedule I showed you last night. Can you do that? Yes. Good. And Emmett. She used his first name naturally, as if they had known each other for years. Do not give up hope. Children are resilient, and with proper care, they will recover. She left that afternoon, riding her sturdy mare back through the snow toward Park City, and Emmett stood at the window watching her go, feeling as if she was taking the sun with her. But she had left practical gifts behind: food, instructions, and most importantly, hope. He followed her directions carefully, feeding Rose every 2 hours with soup-soaked cloth, giving Thomas his chamomile tea, keeping the twins warm and clean. The work was exhausting, but it felt purposeful now instead of desperate. Victoria had shown him that survival was possible, that he was not fighting a losing battle. True to her word, she returned the next day with a pack horse loaded with supplies. Emmett helped her unload sacks of flour and beans, tins of condensed milk, more herbs and medicines, blankets, and even some wooden toys for the children. She had also brought her own belongings: a carpet bag with clothes, a wooden chest with her nursing supplies, and a small trunk containing books. Where did you get the money for all this? Emmett asked, looking at the supplies stacked in the corner. Dr. Hammond paid me my wages for the next 6 months in advance, Victoria said. He is a good man, and he understands that this is important work. I also sold some jewelry my mother left me. It was just sitting in a drawer, and I have more use for food than for pearls. Emmett felt his throat tighten. You sold your mother's jewelry for my sister's children. I sold jewelry for children who need help, Victoria corrected. Now stop looking like you are about to cry and help me organize these supplies. We need to make this last until spring, so we must be careful with rationing. They worked together through the afternoon, Victoria establishing order in the small house with ruthless efficiency. She set up a schedule for feeding, washing, and sleeping that accounted for every hour of the day and night. She mixed condensed milk with water and sugar to create a formula for Rose that was closer to real milk. And she showed Emmett how to feed it to the baby using a glass bottle with a rubber nipple she had brought from the doctor's office. "This will be easier than the cloth method," she explained as Rose sucked tentatively at the bottle. "She can get more milk faster, and it is less exhausting for whoever is feeding her." That night, they took turns sleeping and watching the children, trading off every 4 hours so that each of them could get some rest. When Emmett woke for his midnight shift, he found Victoria asleep in the rocking chair, Rose in her arms, both of them breathing softly in the firelight. Something about the image made his chest ache with an emotion he could not name. The days fell into a pattern. Emmett chopped wood, melted snow for water, and did the heavy labor of keeping the house warm and functional. Victoria cooked, cleaned, and cared for the children with steady competence. They barely spoke beyond what was necessary, both of them too focused on survival to waste energy on conversation, but a quiet understanding grew between them. Emmett learned that Victoria had been orphaned at 16 when her parents died of influenza, and that she had worked her way through nursing training by cleaning houses and taking in laundry. She had been Dr. Hammond's nurse for 3 years, and before that she had worked in a Denver hospital. She was practical, intelligent, and utterly unflappable, qualities that Emmett found himself admiring more each day. Victoria learned that Emmett had left home at 18 to work cattle ranches, sending money back to support Sarah and their widowed mother. Their mother had died 2 years ago, and Sarah had married quickly, a man named Peter who seemed steady but turned out to be a drunk and a wastrel. Peter had left when Sarah was pregnant with Rose, and no one had heard from him since. Emmett blamed himself for not being there, for not seeing that Peter was unreliable, for leaving Sarah alone with more children than she could handle. "You cannot blame yourself for your sister's choices," Victoria said one night as they sat by the fire, the children finally asleep. "She married Peter, not you. She chose to stay with him even when he proved himself worthless. You did what you could. I should have done more. You are doing more now. You are raising her children when you could have left them to an orphanage. That is more than most men would do." Emmett looked at her across the firelight. "Why did you really come here, Victoria? There must be 100 people in Park City who need help. Why 4 babies in a ranch house miles from town?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on the arm of the rocking chair. "When I was 17, I had a baby sister," she said finally. "My mother's last child, born a year before my parents died. After they passed, I tried to care for her, but I was young and I did not know what I was doing. She died of fever that winter. The doctor said I had not kept her warm enough, had not fed her properly. He said it was my fault. Victoria, I am sorry. I became a nurse because I never wanted to feel that helpless again," she continued. "I learned everything I could about caring for the sick and the young, and when Mrs. Henderson came to the doctor's office and said that 4 babies were in danger, I saw a chance to do what I could not do for my sister. That is why I came." Emmett felt a new respect for the woman sitting across from him. She had not come out of pity or obligation, but out of a deep personal need to save lives she had been unable to save before. "Your sister's death was not your fault. You were 17 and alone. You did the best you could." "I know that now," Victoria said. "But knowing and feeling are different things. Helping these children helps heal that old wound, at least a little." They sat in companionable silence after that, the fire crackling between them. And Emmett realized that he was no longer thinking of Victoria as just a helper or a nurse, but as a partner in this impossible task of keeping 4 small lives safe through a deadly winter. The snow continued to fall throughout January, and the world outside their small house became a white wasteland. Several times they woke to find snow piled halfway up the door, and Emmett had to dig them out before he could get to the woodpile. The temperature dropped so low that frost formed on the inside of the windows, and they had to keep the fire roaring day and night. But inside the house, life improved. Rose gained weight steadily, her face filling out and her cries becoming stronger, more indignant than desperate. Thomas's cough improved with regular doses of chamomile tea and the warmth of a consistently heated house. The twins learned to say a few words, calling Victoria Viva, because they could not manage her full name, and the sound of their laughter became common as they grew healthier and more secure. Emmett found himself watching Victoria more often than was probably appropriate. He noticed the way she hummed while cooking, old hymns and folk songs he half remembered from his childhood. He noticed how gently she brushed Margaret's hair, working out tangles with patient care. He noticed the rare smile that lit up her serious face when Thomas said something funny, and he found himself trying to provoke that smile more often. Victoria seemed unaware of his attention, or perhaps she simply did not care. She focused on her work with single-minded determination, and if she ever felt awkward about their living arrangement, she never showed it. Emmett appreciated her professionalism even as he wished, sometimes, that she would let down her guard and let him see more of the woman behind the capable nurse. February brought a brief thaw, and Emmett made the trip into Park City to buy more supplies and check if there was any mail. Victoria stayed at the ranch with the children, and Emmett found himself hurrying through his errands, eager to return. The town gossips tried to question him about his arrangement with Victoria Foster, but he shut them down with cold politeness and finished his business quickly. He returned with letters from 2 of the neighbor women who sent their regards, a packet of hard candy for the children, and news that Mr. Peterson at the general store had reduced their debt by half, saying that he admired what Emmett and Victoria were doing. "People are not all bad," Victoria said when he told her about the reduced debt. "Most folks want to help when they can." "Most folks also want to gossip," Emmett said. "Mrs. Sullivan asked me 3 times if our arrangement was proper." Victoria laughed, a real laugh that transformed her face from serious to beautiful. "Mrs. Sullivan asked me the same thing before I left town. I told her that propriety matters less than keeping children alive. That shut her up fairly quick." Emmett grinned. "I wish I had thought of that." They celebrated the small victory of the reduced debt by making a proper dinner. Fried chicken with gravy, mashed potatoes, and biscuits with butter. The children ate until they were stuffed, and even Rose seemed content, her little belly round with milk. After dinner, Emmett brought out the hard candy and gave each child a piece, watching their faces light up with delight. "This is good," Thomas said, his words clearer than they had been weeks ago. "Thank you, Uncle Emmett." It was the first time Thomas had called him uncle, and Emmett felt his throat close with emotion. He ruffled the boy's hair and nodded, not trusting himself to speak. That night, after the children were asleep, Emmett and Victoria sat by the fire as had become their custom. Emmett had brought a bottle of whiskey from town, and he poured them each a small glass. "To survival," he said, raising his glass. "To spring," Victoria countered, touching her glass to his. They drank, and the whiskey burned warm down Emmett's throat. He studied Victoria in the firelight, seeing the exhaustion in her face, but also the satisfaction. She had lost weight over the past month, pouring all her energy into caring for the children, but she looked happier than he imagined she had looked in years. "What will you do when spring comes?" he asked. "Will you go back to Dr. Hammond?" Victoria considered the question, swirling the whiskey in her glass. "I have not thought that far ahead. I suppose I could go back to nursing, but I have grown attached to these children. Leaving them would be difficult." "You could stay," Emmett said, the words coming out before he could think them through. "The children need you, and I cannot manage alone. You could stay on as their caretaker." "As an employee?" Victoria asked, her tone neutral. "As whatever you want to be," Emmett said. "As a friend, as family." "These children love you, Victoria. You have done more for them than anyone could have expected. I do not want you to leave when spring comes." Victoria met his eyes, and he saw something uncertain in her expression, something vulnerable that she usually kept hidden. "And what do you want, Emmett?" "Beyond what is best for the children." It was a fair question, and Emmett knew she deserved an honest answer. "I want you to stay because I have come to depend on you, not just for help with the children, but for your company. I want you to stay because this house feels empty when you are not in it. I want you to stay because somewhere over the past 2 months, you became the person I most want to see when I wake up in the morning." The confession hung between them, raw and honest, and Emmett waited for Victoria's response with his heart pounding. She set down her glass carefully and stood, and for a terrible moment he thought she was going to retreat to bed without answering. But instead she crossed to where he sat and held out her hand. He took it, standing, and they faced each other in the firelight. Victoria reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his rough cheek. "I want to stay," she said softly. "Not just for the children, though I do love them. I want to stay because you are a good man, Emmett Logan, better than any I have met. I want to stay because I feel safe here and happy and needed. I want to stay because when I think about leaving, my chest hurts." Emmett covered her hand with his, turning his face to kiss her palm. "Then stay. Stay and help me raise these children. Stay and let me court you properly once winter ends. Stay and give us a chance to see what this could become." "Yes," Victoria said, and then she was in his arms, her face pressed against his chest, and he was holding her like she was the most precious thing in the world. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, the fire warming them and the children sleeping peacefully nearby. When they finally pulled apart, Victoria looked up at him with shining eyes. "We should probably sleep," she said, but she made no move to step away. "Probably," Emmett agreed, and then he kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet, a promise of things to come rather than a demand. Victoria's lips were soft under his, and when she kissed him back, he felt something settle in his chest, a rightness that he had never felt before. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard and Victoria's cheeks were flushed. "That was nice," she said, and Emmett laughed at the understatement. "Just nice." "Very nice," she amended, and then she kissed him again. They agreed to continue as they had been for propriety's sake, separate beds and a careful distance in public. But in private moments, they allowed themselves the freedom to grow closer. Emmett found reasons to stand near Victoria while she cooked, his hand brushing her waist as he reached for something. Victoria leaned against him when they sat by the fire, her head on his shoulder, their fingers intertwined. The children seemed to sense the change, and their behavior reflected it. Thomas laughed more, his grief finally beginning to ease. The twins followed Emmett and Victoria around like ducklings, demanding attention and stories. Rose thrived, growing plump and alert, her eyes tracking movement and her mouth curving into gummy smiles. March brought stronger thaws and hints of spring. The snow began to melt, revealing brown grass and mud, and the temperature climbed high enough that Emmett could work outside without freezing. He repaired the barn roof, checked on the 2 cows who had survived the winter, and began planning for spring planting. Victoria aired out the house, washing linens and curtains, scrubbing floors and windows until everything gleamed. She seemed energized by the improving weather, singing as she worked, and Emmett often caught himself just watching her, marveling that she had chosen to stay. One evening in late March, as they sat outside watching the sunset while the children played in the mud, Emmett gathered his courage. "Victoria, I want to ask you something." She turned to look at him, her face soft in the golden light. "Ask." "Will you marry me?" Victoria's eyes widened and she opened her mouth, closed it, then laughed. "That was very abrupt." "I know, but I have been thinking about it for weeks, and I cannot wait any longer. I love you, Victoria Foster. I love your strength and your kindness and the way you hum while you cook. I love how you care for these children like they are your own, and I love how you make me want to be a better man. Marry me and be my wife, not just the caretaker of my nieces and nephews, but my partner in everything. Help me raise these children and maybe have a few of our own someday. Build a life with me here on this ranch and let me spend the rest of my days making you happy." Tears streamed down Victoria's face, but she was smiling. "You really love me, more than I thought possible." "I love you too," she said. "I have loved you since you looked at me that first day like I was an angel come to save you. I have loved you through every exhausted night and every small victory with the children. I have loved watching you become a father to them, seeing your patience and your dedication. Yes, Emmett Logan, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, not caring that the children were watching, not caring about anything except the woman in his arms and the future stretching out before them. They were married in April, a simple ceremony in Park City with Dr. Hammond standing as witness and Mrs. Henderson holding Rose during the vows. Thomas stood beside Emmett as his best man, looking serious and important in his best clothes, and the twins scattered wildflowers down the aisle, giggling the whole time. Victoria wore a pale blue dress that she had sewn herself, and Emmett wore his only suit, brushed and pressed for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the small congregation cheered, and Emmett kissed his bride while the children clapped. They returned to the ranch that evening as a family, legally and officially bound together. Emmett carried Victoria over the threshold while the children laughed, and they spent their wedding night much as they had spent the previous months, caring for 4 children, washing dishes, and sitting by the fire. But now Victoria sat on Emmett's lap instead of across from him, and they kissed between conversations, and when they finally went to bed, it was together, as husband and wife. Life on the ranch settled into a new normal. Emmett worked the land, planting crops and tending the small herd of cattle he had managed to buy with money saved from careful budgeting. Victoria ran the household with the same efficiency she had brought to nursing, and the children thrived under their joint care. Thomas started helping with small chores, gathering eggs from the chickens and feeding the goats that Victoria insisted they buy for milk. He was a serious child, still marked by the loss of his mother, but he smiled more often now, and he called Victoria Aunt Vicky with easy affection. The twins grew into wild, energetic toddlers who kept Victoria constantly busy, and Rose developed a sweet, placid temperament that made her easy to love. By the time summer arrived, the ranch was prospering modestly. Emmett sold some cattle at a good price, and they used the money to buy a real bed frame and a cook stove, small luxuries that made a big difference. Victoria planted a vegetable garden, and the children helped her water and weed, learning about where food came from. Evenings were Emmett's favorite time. After dinner, they would all sit outside and watch the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Thomas would tell stories he had invented, wild tales of cowboys and Indians that made everyone laugh. The twins would chase fireflies while Rose sat on Victoria's lap, babbling in her own language. And Emmett would look at his family, this strange patchwork of souls that fate had brought together, and feel more grateful than he had ever thought possible. In August, Victoria told him she was pregnant. They were in the kitchen, Emmett washing dishes while Victoria dried when she simply said, "I am going to have a baby." Emmett almost dropped the plate he was holding. "What? A baby? Our baby? I am about 3 months along, I think. I have been too busy to pay attention to the signs, but there is no doubt now." Emmett swept her into his arms, soapy hands and all, and spun her around while she laughed. "A baby! We are having a baby." "Careful, you will make me dizzy," she said, but she was grinning widely, her happiness matching his own. They told the children at dinner, and Thomas looked thoughtful. "Will you still love us when you have your own baby?" he asked, his voice small. Victoria knelt beside him immediately, taking his hands. "Thomas, you are our children, all 4 of you. This baby will be your brother or sister, and we will love all of you exactly the same. Having another child does not mean we love you any less. Do you understand?" Thomas nodded slowly, and then he smiled. "I think it will be good to have a baby. Rose is getting too big to be a baby anymore." Margaret and Matthew wanted to know if the baby could play with them, and Rose just smiled and reached for the spoon Victoria had left on the table. Emmett watched his wife handle their concerns with patience and love, and he fell in love with her all over again. Victoria's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though she refused to slow down her usual pace. She still cooked and cleaned and cared for the children, waving off Emmett's concerns with practical logic. "Women have been working through pregnancy since the dawn of time. I am healthy and strong, and I know my limits." Still, Emmett insisted on taking over the heavier chores, and he hired a woman from town to come help with laundry and cleaning as Victoria's belly grew. Mrs. Henderson checked on them regularly, bringing baby clothes and advice and doctor. Hammond rode out once a month to examine Victoria and assure them that everything was progressing well. Winter came again, but this time they were prepared. The house was well stocked with food and firewood, the children were healthy and happy, and Emmett and Victoria faced the cold with confidence born of experience. Snow fell heavily in January, but it seemed less threatening now, more beautiful than dangerous. Victoria went into labor on a cold February morning, the world outside white and still. Emmett sent Thomas riding to town to fetch Dr. Hammond and Mrs. Henderson while he stayed with Victoria, holding her hand and trying not to panic. The labor was long and difficult, Victoria's face pale and sweating as she worked to bring their child into the world, and Emmett felt helpless in the face of her pain. But Victoria was strong, and when the baby finally came, wailing and red-faced and perfect, Emmett wept with relief and joy. Dr. Hammond cleaned the infant and wrapped him in a blanket, then placed him in Victoria's arms. "You have a son," the doctor said with a smile. "A healthy, strong boy." Victoria looked down at their baby with wonder, and then up at Emmett with love shining in her eyes. "We have a son." Emmett kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, overcome with emotion. "You did so well. You are amazing. I love you so much." They named him Jacob after Emmett's father, and the children were enchanted with their new brother. Thomas held him carefully, his face serious with concentration, and the twins wanted to touch his tiny hands and feet. Even Rose seemed fascinated, leaning over the cradle to stare at the baby with wide eyes. Life with 5 children was chaotic, but it was a good chaos, full of laughter and noise and love. Emmett expanded the house, adding 2 more rooms so that the children could have proper bedrooms. He built furniture in the evenings, a larger table and chairs, bunk beds for the twins, a cradle for Jacob that would someday hold more babies, God willing. Victoria recovered from childbirth quickly, and soon she was back to her usual efficiency, though Emmett insisted she accept more help from the woman they had hired. He wanted her to have time to enjoy their son, to sit and nurse him without worrying about 100 other tasks. Spring brought new opportunities. A rancher 3 miles away offered to pay Emmett to break his horses, good money for work Emmett enjoyed. He accepted, and the extra income allowed them to buy more cattle and hire a hand to help with the daily ranch work. Their modest operation was becoming a real success, and Emmett took pride in providing well for his growing family. Thomas turned 6 and started attending the school in Park City, riding into town each morning with other children from nearby ranches. He was bright and eager to learn, and his teacher told Emmett and Victoria that he was one of her best students. The twins were wild as ever, 3 years old and into everything, but they were also loving and sweet, quick to hug and kiss and tell everyone that they loved them. Rose was a 1.5 years now, walking and talking in short sentences, and she adored her baby brother. She would sit beside his cradle and sing to him nonsense songs that made everyone smile. Jacob was a placid baby, content to lie and watch the activity around him, and he smiled at everyone who came near. One evening in May, as they celebrated their first wedding anniversary, Emmett and Victoria sat on the porch while the children played in the yard. The sunset was spectacular, the sky ablaze with orange and pink and gold, and the air smelled of blooming wildflowers and fresh grass. "You remember this time last year?" Victoria asked, leaning against Emmett's shoulder. "I remember being terrified that you would realize what you had agreed to and run back to town," Emmett said with a smile. "I remember thinking I was the luckiest woman alive," Victoria countered. "I had married a good man, gained 4 beautiful children, and found a home. That has not changed. If anything, I feel luckier now. Even with 5 children and a ranch to run and never a moment's peace, especially with all that," Victoria said. "This life is everything I never knew I wanted. You are everything I never knew I needed." Emmett kissed her, long and sweet, and when they pulled apart, he saw Thomas watching them with a smile. "Are you going to kiss all the time now that you are married?" the boy asked. "Probably," Emmett said. "Is that a problem?" Thomas considered this seriously. "No, I think it is good. Mama and Papa used to kiss before Papa left. It made Mama happy. You should kiss Aunt Vicky a lot so she stays happy." "I intend to," Emmett said, pulling Victoria closer. The years passed in a blur of seasons and growth. The twins started school, proud to follow their older brother, and Rose prepared to start the year after. Jacob grew into a sturdy toddler, followed by another son 2 years later whom they named Samuel, and then a daughter they named Grace. The ranch prospered, and Emmett became known throughout the territory as a fair rancher and an expert horseman. Victoria earned respect as a healer, often riding out to help neighbors with medical problems, her nursing skills never forgotten. Their home became a gathering place, neighbors stopping by for advice or assistance or just a hot meal and good company. Thomas grew tall and strong, taking after Emmett in build and temperament. At 16, he was already helping run the ranch, and Emmett trusted him with responsibilities that would have overwhelmed many adult men. The twins, Margaret and Matthew, were inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and sharing that mysterious connection that twins often have. Rose became the family peacemaker, gentle and kind, always ready to help with the younger children. Jacob inherited his mother's intelligence and his father's work ethic, a combination that promised great things. Samuel was the family clown, always making jokes and getting into mischief, and Grace was a tiny force of nature, bossing around her older siblings with the confidence of someone who knew she was loved beyond measure. On their 10th anniversary, Emmett and Victoria took a rare moment alone, riding up into the mountains above their ranch to a spot where they could see the whole valley spread out below. Their ranch house looked small from this height, smoke rising from the chimney, children visible as tiny figures moving around the yard. "We built something good," Victoria said, her hand in Emmett's. "You built something good," Emmett corrected. "I was drowning when you walked into my life. You saved those children, and you saved me." "We saved each other," Victoria said. "I was drifting before I came to your ranch, going through the motions of life without really living. You gave me purpose and love and a family. Everything I have, everything I am is better because of you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land, over their life. And Emmett thought back to that terrible winter 10 years ago when he had stood in a cold house with 4 crying babies, and no idea how he would survive. He thought about the moment Victoria had walked through the door with her pot of soup and her calm competence, how she had taken control and given him hope when he had none. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Giving up your career, staying out here in the middle of nowhere, taking on someone else's children?" Victoria turned to look at him, her face older now but no less beautiful, lined with laughter and love and the passage of time. "Never. Not once. These are the best years of my life, Emmett. Every single day with you and our children is a gift. I would not change a single thing. Not even the hard times. The winters when we barely had enough food, the times I was short-tempered or distant, the times the children were sick and we stayed up for days worrying." "Not even those," Victoria said firmly. "The hard times made the good times sweeter. They taught us what we were capable of, showed us how strong we were together. I would live through every difficult moment again if it meant I got to end up here with you, with this life we built." Emmett pulled her close and kissed her, pouring 10 years of love and gratitude into that kiss. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "We should get back," Victoria said. "The children will be waiting for dinner." "The children are old enough to cook their own dinner," Emmett said. "Thomas can manage the younger ones for one evening." "Are you suggesting we stay out here all night?" Victoria asked, her eyes twinkling. "I am suggesting we take a few hours for ourselves. We have earned it." They did stay out as the stars came out, lying on a blanket and talking about everything and nothing, remembering the early days and making plans for the future. They talked about Thomas potentially going to university, about expanding the ranch, about growing old together and watching their children have children of their own. When they finally rode back down the mountain, the house was quiet, the children all asleep. Thomas had managed dinner and bedtime by himself, and he gave them a knowing smile when they came in. "Have a good ride?" he asked. "The best," Emmett said, clapping his shoulder. "Thank you for taking care of things." "That is what family does," Thomas said. "We take care of each other." It was a philosophy that guided their household, and one that served them well through the years that followed. When Margaret got sick with scarlet fever, the whole family rallied around her, and she recovered thanks to Victoria's nursing and everyone's prayers. When drought hit the following summer, neighbors helped them get through, and they in turn helped others when the cattle market crashed. Thomas married at 21, a sweet girl from town named Elizabeth, and they built a small house on the far edge of the ranch property. A year later, they made Emmett and Victoria grandparents with the birth of a daughter they named Sarah, after Thomas's mother. Emmett held his granddaughter and wept, thinking of his sister who had died so young, grateful that her son had grown into such a fine man and that her memory lived on. Matthew followed his brother into marriage 2 years later, and Margaret married the year after that. Rose showed no interest in boys, instead studying to become a teacher, and she eventually got a position at the Park City school where she had once been a student. Jacob talked about becoming a doctor, inspired by stories of his mother's nursing days, and Emmett and Victoria began saving money to send him to medical school. Samuel and Grace were still young, but they showed signs of the same strength and independence that characterized their older siblings. The ranch continued to prosper, and Emmett and Victoria settled into middle age with the comfort of work well done and a family well raised. On their 20th anniversary, they hosted a party that brought together their entire extended family. Thomas and Elizabeth came with their 3 children. Matthew and his wife brought their newborn son, and Margaret rode over with her husband. Rose took a break from teaching to join them, and Jacob was home from his first year at university. Samuel and Grace, now teenagers, helped set up tables and chairs in the yard. As Emmett looked around at the gathered family, at the children running and playing, at the adults laughing and talking, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This life, this family, it had all started with 4 babies and a winter that nearly killed them. It had started with Victoria walking through the door with soup and hope, with her decision to stay when she could have left, with their choice to build a life together. Victoria came to stand beside him, sliding her hand into his. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About that first winter," Emmett said. "About how close we came to losing everything and how lucky I was that you walked through that door." "I was the lucky one," Victoria said. "You gave me a family, Emmett. You gave me a life I never dreamed was possible." "We gave each other everything," Emmett said, "and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." Thomas stood up then, raising his glass. "I would like to make a toast," he said, his voice carrying over the gathering. "To Uncle Emmett and Aunt Victoria, who took in 4 orphans when they had nothing, who built a life out of love and hard work, who taught us what family really means. Everything I am, everything we all are is because of you. Happy anniversary." The whole gathering raised their glasses, and Emmett saw tears on more than one face. He raised his own glass, looking at Victoria, seeing in her eyes the same love and devotion he had seen that first night when she agreed to marry him. "To family," he said. "To love. To Victoria, the woman who saved my life. To Emmett," Victoria added, "the man who made my life worth living." They drank, and then the party continued, children running and adults talking, food disappearing and laughter rising into the summer evening. But Emmett and Victoria stood together, hands clasped, hearts full, knowing that whatever challenges came, they would face them together as they always had, as they always would. The years continued to pass, each one bringing new joys and sorrows, triumphs and trials. They faced everything together: the death of Dr. Hammond, who left Victoria a substantial sum in his will in gratitude for her years of service; the birth of more grandchildren, until they lost count of how many descendants they had; the slow decline of age as their hair went gray and their movements became stiffer. Through it all, their love never wavered. They still sat together by the fire in the evenings, still held hands when they walked, still kissed each other goodbye every morning and hello every evening. Their children and grandchildren often commented on how devoted they were, how rare it was to see a couple so obviously in love after so many years. "It is because we chose each other every day," Victoria would explain when asked. "Love is not just a feeling. It is a choice you make over and over, to put the other person first, to work together, to forgive and be forgiven." Emmett would add, "And it helps when you marry your best friend, someone who makes you laugh and challenges you to be better and stands beside you no matter what. They were right, of course. Their love had been forged in crisis and tempered by years of partnership, and it was stronger than anything life could throw at them. When Emmett was 65, he finally admitted he was too old to break horses and handed that part of the business over to Samuel, who had inherited his father's gift with animals. When Victoria was 60, she finally stopped riding out to treat sick neighbors, training Rose's daughter to take over the family healing tradition instead. They spent their later years surrounded by family. The ranch house expanded multiple times to accommodate gatherings, the yard always full of children and grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. They told stories about the old days, about the winter that brought them together, about building a life from nothing but determination and love. Thomas was in his 50s when he sat down with Emmett one evening, his face serious. "I need to ask you something, Uncle Emmett. Something I have wondered about for years." "Ask," Emmett said. "My mother, your sister Sarah. Do you think she would be proud of how we turned out? Do you think she would approve of the life you and Aunt Victoria built for us?" Emmett felt tears prick his eyes. Even after all these years, talking about Sarah could still affect him. "I think your mother would be amazed and grateful beyond words. She loved you children more than life itself, and it broke her heart that she could not stay to raise you. But she would see that you grew into good people, strong and kind and capable. She would see that you were loved and cared for, that you had a family that treasured you. Yes, Thomas, I think Sarah would be very proud." "Thank you," Thomas said quietly. "I needed to hear that." They sat in comfortable silence after that, father and son in all but blood, bound by love and shared history. Emmett was 72 when he had his first serious health scare, a pain in his chest that sent Victoria into action mode, summoning Jacob, who was now a respected doctor, and refusing to let Emmett minimize his symptoms. Jacob examined his father and prescribed rest and medicine, but the incident reminded them all that time was precious. Victoria nursed Emmett through his recovery with the same competent care she had shown 40 years earlier with 4 babies, and Emmett was reminded again how lucky he was to have her. When he was strong enough to get out of bed, he took her hand and said, "I love you more now than I did on our wedding day. I did not think that was possible, but it is true." "I know," Victoria said, kissing his forehead. "I feel the same way. We have grown old together, Emmett, and that is a precious gift. Not everyone gets that." They recovered from that scare and had several more good years, years filled with family gatherings and quiet evenings and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. Their descendants numbered in the dozens now, spread across Utah and beyond, but they all came home to the ranch for holidays and celebrations, bringing the house alive with noise and love. Emmett was 78 when Victoria got sick. It started as a cold that would not go away, then developed into pneumonia that left her weak and struggling to breathe. Jacob came to stay, bringing his full medical knowledge to bear, but even he had limits. Emmett sat beside Victoria's bed day and night, holding her hand, talking to her, reminding her of their life together. "Remember that first winter," he said one evening. "Remember how scared I was, how lost. And then you walked in with that soup, and suddenly everything seemed possible." Victoria squeezed his hand weakly. I remember thinking you were the most exhausted person I had ever seen, and those babies were so small and helpless. I remember deciding I would do whatever it took to save them." "You saved all of us," Emmett said. "You gave us life and love and everything good." "We gave each other those things," Victoria corrected, her voice raspy. "That is what partnership means. Equal giving, equal receiving." She recovered from that bout of pneumonia, but it left her permanently weakened. She could no longer do the physical work she once had, and she spent most days in a chair by the fire, wrapped in blankets, holding grandchildren and telling stories. Emmett stayed close, bringing her tea, reading to her, making sure she was comfortable. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by 4 generations of family. The party filled the house and spilled out into the yard, and Emmett and Victoria sat in places of honor, accepting hugs and well wishes from their descendants. A granddaughter had made a banner that read 50 years of love, and it hung across the fireplace. Thomas stood to make a toast again, as he had 20 years earlier. His hair was gray now, his face lined, but his voice was still strong. 50 years ago, a cowboy and a nurse chose each other in the middle of a harsh winter. They chose love over loneliness, partnership over isolation, family over solitude. They raised me and my siblings when they could have sent us to an orphanage. They built this ranch from almost nothing. They loved each other through good times and bad, through poverty and prosperity, through youth and old age. They showed all of us what real love looks like, what real commitment means. Uncle Emmett, Aunt Victoria, thank you for everything you have given us. Thank you for teaching us how to love. The room erupted in applause, and Emmett looked at Victoria to see tears streaming down her face. He pulled her close and kissed her, not caring that their entire family was watching, and the applause got louder. 50 years, Victoria whispered when they pulled apart. Can you believe it? I can believe every moment, Emmett said. Every single day with you has been a gift. They had 2 more years together after that anniversary. 2 years of quiet mornings and peaceful evenings, of visits from family and time spent remembering. Victoria grew weaker gradually, but she remained mentally sharp and emotionally present until the very end. She died on a spring morning with the windows open, and the smell of wildflowers drifting in on the breeze. Emmett held her hand as she slipped away, whispering that he loved her, that he would see her again, that she could rest now. The family gathered, filling the house one last time while Victoria was still with them, and when she took her last breath, Emmett bent and kissed her forehead. Thank you, he whispered. Thank you for everything. The funeral was the largest Park City had seen in years, people coming from across the territory to pay their respects to Victoria Foster Logan, nurse, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, and beloved wife. Emmett stood at the graveside, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, and thought about the 52 years they had shared, all the memories they had made, all the love they had given and received. Thomas stood beside him, now 70 years old himself, and put an arm around his uncle's shoulders. She loved you until the very end, he said. I hope you know that. I do, Emmett said, and I will love her until mine. He lived for 3 more years after Victoria's death, years that felt hollow despite being surrounded by family. He spent his days sitting in the chair Victoria had used, wrapped in the quilt she had made, telling stories about her to anyone who would listen. He made sure his grandchildren and great-grandchildren knew who she was, what she had done, how much she had meant. When Emmett's time finally came, he died peacefully in his sleep, a smile on his face, and the family liked to think he had gone to join Victoria wherever she was waiting. They buried him beside her, 2 graves side by side with matching headstones that read beloved husband and wife, together forever. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations, each one adding their own stories to its history. But the original story, the story of a cowboy left with 4 babies in a terrible winter, and the nurse who walked in with hot soup and stayed to build a life, that story was told over and over, a testament to love and faith and the power of choosing each other against all odds. The house where it all began still stands, now maintained as a family heritage site. Visitors can see the fireplace where Emmett and Victoria sat together for so many evenings, the rocking chair where she fed babies and told stories, the kitchen where she cooked meals that fed bodies and souls. On the wall hangs a photograph from their 50th anniversary, Emmett and Victoria looking at each other with the same love and devotion they had shown from the very beginning. Beneath the photograph is a plaque that reads, "In 1884, love walked through a door carrying soup and hope. Here it stayed, grew, and flourished for 52 years, leaving a legacy of family and devotion that continues to this day." And that, in the end, was their story. Not a fairy tale, but something better. A real love between real people who chose each other every day, who built something beautiful from almost nothing, who proved that the greatest adventures are not found in distant lands but in the daily choice to love another person with everything you have. Their descendants still gather at the ranch every year on the anniversary of that first meeting, when Victoria walked into Emmett's life and changed it forever. They share a meal of soup and bread, honoring the simple gift that started it all, and they tell the story again, keeping it alive for new generations. Because some stories are too good, too true, too important to let fade. Some stories need to be remembered and retold, not as legends or myths, but as reminders of what human beings are capable of when they choose love over fear, partnership over isolation, and family over everything else. Emmett and Victoria's story is one of those stories. It began with 4 crying babies and a pot of hot soup on a cold winter day, and it blossomed into something that touched hundreds of lives across multiple generations. It proved that heroes do not always carry guns or ride to glory. Sometimes they carry soup pots and stay to help. Sometimes they are just ordinary people making an extraordinary choice to care for others when it would be easier to walk away. And sometimes, in the middle of choosing to help someone else, they find the love of their life and build a future neither of them could have imagined alone. That is what happened in Park City, Utah, in the winter of 1884, and the echo of that choice still resonates today in the lives of everyone who came after. Everyone who exists, because a cowboy and a nurse looked at each other across a room full of crying babies and decided to build a life together. It is a story of survival and hope, of practical love and daily devotion, of a partnership that endured for more than half a century and created a legacy that will never be forgotten. It is the story of Emmett Logan and Victoria Foster, who met in the worst circumstances imaginable and created the best possible life together.